kind of at that 250 number, and then everybody will kind of come in the next 5 minutes or so and continue to grow our crowd. But Les, you want to go ahead and start us off with a prayer?
Will do. Thank you, Michael. Let us pray. Father, we're thankful for the community that you've given us to serve. Lord, what a blessing for this cooler weather, for the opportunity, Lord, to just get outside. Father, we pray for those that are in healthcare, those taking care of the sick, those that are in harm's way. Lord, we ask your blessing to be upon them, surround them, protect them. Be with those that are sick, and Lord, be with us. Be with all of us as servants of your community. Guide us, direct us, lead us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Les. We'll take a couple of minutes for people to type any gratitudes that you have into the chat box, whether you express them out loud or type them in or share them. The important thing is that we take time each day to express and share those gratitudes. Larry, I will say that we have done these every week, even when you weren't on the call. So I haven't only done these because we're looking and going to be joined later by Larry, who kind of taught us and instilled a lot of these things in us. But gratitude-wise, Les had actually kind of mentioned mine. It may sound not that important, but I know a lot of people will grateful that the beaches are open. I know a lot of people are grateful that the parks are open. We're grateful for this amazing weather that God has given us, and grateful to be living where we live, and that we can enjoy the outdoors and enjoy some time outside. And it certainly is nice to be able to live where we live and take advantage of some of the great things that we have. Last week, if you didn't join us, all the town halls are recorded and on C1 Rose. Last week, we talked about the myth of certainty, making sure that things that we may have thought were true but didn't really turn out to be true were so. So remember the ostrich. An ostrich does not bury its head in the sand. An ostrich actually sticks its head in the sand to move its eggs around because its nest is underground. But everybody thinks an ostrich sticks its head in the sand to avoid something. So sometimes we need to make sure we're taking a look at what we think is true and find out some of those things may be a myth. And this market, this shutdown and quarantine and certainly exigent circumstances have given us a chance to kind of take a look at some of the things we're doing in our personal and business life. And make sure that they're true and that we really understand what's going on there. Looking at the market, we have definitely seen, I'm going to call it a snapback or a little bit of a rebound. And I'll tell you, why, we need to obviously take all of this with a grain of salt. But I think, as everybody knows by now, last week was the busiest week ever in our MLS. It was the busiest week ever by about 10%, with nearly 500 properties going under contract last week. So that certainly is quite a feat. It certainly shows a lot of that pent-up demand, and it certainly allows us to be in a great position, having stayed in contact with our clients, to serve them now that they are feeling a little more comfortable about things. We will continue to have some struggles in the market. I want to make sure that we celebrate the good news, but that we obviously take it with a sense of reality. Unlike a hurricane, that once it passes us, rarely, although we had one last year, do they turn around and come back. But usually once they pass and go away, the threat is over. Remember, the shutdown and quarantines were intended to flatten the curve and not overwhelm the healthcare system, but this virus isn't going away. So we will probably have some setbacks here and there, and we'll respond to them as a company, as families, as individuals, as we get to address them one-on-one. But we'll certainly take these great times of activity and nice recovery periods as we get them. We've seen similar showings. A couple weeks ago, we hit a low point of down 55%, and last week they were down 14%. And as some of Dave's memos have talked about, remember, you know, a lot of those, there's always a little bit of noise in those showings. You know, somebody who comes to town for Spoleto, who might move here in a year or two and wants to go see some houses, or somebody who may not have taken their buyer through the funnel process to narrow down what they should be looking at, or somebody who might not be that serious. So, you know, even when sales return to normal, we'll probably see showings down by 10 or 15%, but that doesn't mean sales are down by 10 or 15%. We've seen some articles in the Post and Courier talking about showings. And again, every time you see one of those articles, it presents you a great opportunity to communicate with your client so they understand why you're the expert in the space, and to help them understand that just because showings are down 15%, we can have that and a record week of written contracts at the same time. Inventory continues to decline, which was a little bit of a blessing as sales dropped off. We actually saw demand drop off and supply drop off. But now we're going to start to see inventory build. Listings is always the name of the game. And it's important to make sure, a couple weeks ago, we talked about what it takes to be a good rebounder. But now is the time, after you've done all those steps to be a good rebounder, to make sure you secure the ball on the way down. And there'll be a lot of new listings, and it's really the time to get in touch with your clients and kind of let them know what's going on to see if this market fits their needs as well. As we move towards introducing or having kind of a nice Q&A session with Larry Kendall, you know, wanted to kind of do both as an introduction, but also kind of some maybe thought-provoking little section kind of that I kind of titled, "Are you playing the finite or infinite game?" And many of you have read Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game. And it kind of made me think about both the why and the how as a collective group that we serve our clients. And that really ties in with our guest today. Simon Sinek was talking about his book, The Infinite Game, in a podcast I was listening to. And if you've been through the Ninja installation, either in Colorado or one of the 50 installations that we've taught here, you'll remember that concept in some of the games, the XY game and other things that John Brewer demonstrates and teaches through the installation. But a quick refresher, if you have not yet been through the installation, or if you haven't read that book, you know, there are two different kinds of games, a finite game and an infinite game. You know, a finite game, the best example would be sports. You've got known players, you've got fixed rules, you've got agreed upon objectives. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if there's a winner, there's going to be a loser in that game as well. So sports is kind of the best example of that. We all know the rules. There's a start of the game, the end of the game, and at the end of that game, someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, and that's okay. The other type of game is the infinite game. And in the infinite game, there are known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective of the game is not to win or lose, but to perpetuate the game and keep it going as long as possible. And unlike sports, if you think about an infinite game, you know, the better example of the infinite game would kind of be like a marriage. There's no such thing as winning. There's no such thing as being number one. And your goal is to make it last as long as possible. And I think those are two important concepts to remember, because there's also different ways to look at how we do business. You know, is it a competition where my client's going to win and your client's going to lose, where one agent is going to win and one agent is going to lose? Now, it doesn't mean I'm not saying there's anything wrong with competition. You're correct. If you go into a listing appointment against another agent and you get the listing, yes, there's someone who won and someone who lost. But when we're talking about negotiating, when we're talking about how we run a business, we don't need other people to lose in order to win or achieve our goals. But too many agents, especially in tight inventory markets, especially in time of crisis, play a finite instead of an infant game. And we do start to see that as inventory gets tight, as we see multiple offer situations. We start to see that a lot. And a couple of the lessons from the infinite game, when we look at some of the principles that we follow, if we're going to have that infinite mindset, is, are we advancing a just cause? And certainly in our business, helping people with shelter, I know that's one of our whys. One of the reasons why myself and my family are in this business is there's really no greater calling than to help people with shelter. And yes, they can achieve their financial goals through real estate as well. But just like us posting pictures of the first day of school in front of your front door of your home, our homes are such a huge part of our lives, and the opportunity to help people with that is truly a blessing. It's important, if you're playing an infinite game, to study your worthy rivals. And you notice we use the word rivals as opposed to competitors. There are lots of other good people in our marketplace and across the country that sell real estate and represent their clients. They may choose to do it in different philosophical ways than we do, but that's okay. You'll never hear me say one's wrong or right. You'll just hear me say they're different. But as we look at how we're adapting to this market, and how others are adapting from this market, we all learn from one another, and it's important to look around. And the other is when he talks about if you're going to play an infinite game, is to make sure you prepare for what he calls existential flexibility, which is certainly appropriate now. How do you, in your own business, in your own life, how do we as a company adapt and pivot to the changes not only in the market, but in the industry, and over the last 8 to 10 weeks in the whole world. And these meetings and a chance to get together on a weekly basis with 350 members of our family, and have guests like Larry join us, who did speak to us in person and live as a company coming on about 15 years ago, are huge opportunities that the truth is we really could have been doing long before, and adapting and pivoting to those existential circumstances certainly give us those opportunities. So I think that's important to kind of lay the groundwork as we get into our conversation with Larry Kendall. Larry, your bio was on the Zoom invitation and is certainly impressive. But the introduction that I would give to Larry would actually be a personal thank you, that absent any single individual who's not a member of our team or an employee or an agent, Larry has, in my opinion, had the greatest influence on our company of anyone else out there. The truth is, in 2005, when I first had the opportunity to go to a class in Colorado and learn a lot of the relationship selling principles that Larry talks about, and when I say talks about, I guess believes, or certainly brought to the real estate industry. And not that there weren't people doing things some of the same ways, but really not just a program, but a philosophy as to how we look to serve our clients. And I think those things aligned very well with us as a company. And when we were able to not only take what Larry does, but then with John Brewer becoming one of the first certified ninja instructors outside of Colorado, to be able to bring it to our agents on an ongoing basis through the installation, and not only through the installations, but have it weave through everything we do as a company and the philosophy behind how we do our job, which is to serve our clients and be their guide and counsel them before, after, and during any transaction, and certainly focus on the people as opposed to focusing on the transaction. has really built the foundation under which we've grown for the last many years. So, Larry, I want to thank you for that on behalf of myself and behalf of so many people. You know, as a comment says, Ninja changed their business and their personal life, and so many people that had this not only impact what they do on a professional, what they do on a personal basis. So I want to thank you for that, and I'll use that as your introduction. But also want to ask, how are you? How's your family? How is everyone in Fort Collins?
Well, thank you, Michael. That was a beautiful introduction. I'm honored to be with you. Carolina One is really one of the poster companies as a Ninja company. I'm very proud of you. I brag about you quite often. I appreciate your leadership, Michael. I appreciate John Brewer especially. We've been friends for years. So thank you for inviting me here. Things are great in Colorado. We are healthy, had a chance to get caught up on some projects, and our market, we're allowed to show property again. We had a 6-week period there where we were not allowed to show a house unless the house was under contract. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later, about how you sell houses without showing them. But anyway, we're excited. We're starting to reopen our economy, and similar to you, we're seeing a bounce back in the market. And so anyway, it's an honor for us to be with you today.
Thanks. We appreciate you taking the time. You know, you've built, I like to call it a movement. It's certainly more than a company. It's certainly more than a program on relationship selling. And like I said, we've certainly adopted that as organization. Early on in your career, how did you kind of, or what led you to kind of move in an industry that largely is, and in many aspects still is, and I think we see challenges from that in iBuyer situations and other things that have almost resurfaced a little bit, and there's always room for lots of different models, but how is it in an industry that's always been traditionally focused on the transaction? Did you decide or feel that it was important to put an emphasis and a focus on the relationship and the consumer, which seems a lot more grander and a lot more substantial than kind of real estate had been, which has always been so transactional?
Well, you know, Michael, it started with me with personal experience when I first got into sales. I was new in town. I didn't know anyone. I took a class on how to be successful, and I started practicing those principles. How to door knock, how to cold call, how to hold open houses. I did all those things for my first year. And at the end of the year, when I looked back on it, all of my transactions had come from relationships. I had very few transactions, a result of chasing transactions. I had, most of my business was, in fact, about 90% of it was from relationships. And I realized that is the enduring business strategy, is to build and maintain and nurture relationships. So I learned that from personal experience, and then I started to study other top producers, especially producers who had high income per hour. And what I discovered is that working with relationships, it's much more efficient to work with somebody who already knows you, likes you, and trusts you. You don't have to go build that foundation of trust. It's also, relationships are great generators of referrals. Referrals are the easiest part of the business to do. And so I began to document that with other top producers, and ultimately built a system that's now called the Ninja Selling System that I taught the first class in 1994.
Wow. It's amazing that it goes back that far. And I know you've had a tremendous impact on so many different companies. And following up on a little bit of what you said, you'd kind of talked about studying those agents who had the highest income per hour. And I didn't know if maybe you expand upon that a little bit, because, you know, as we're going to have agents on this call at all different stages of their career. And so, you know, to be clear, I think as you're growing your sphere, that cold calling or door knocking or for sale by owners or River Dogs leads or, joining the social club, any of those things are great as ways to add to your center of influence and meet people if you do it with the right mindset. But I think, Larry, you can kind of expand on this. There is a difference between that and maybe some of the models out there that are just kind of buying leads, but may not be long-term sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. We started to experience some success in our company, and we received some national recognition for it. And as being the most productive real estate company in America in terms of transactions per agent. And I was asked, how do you do that? How do you get that level of productivity? And so I started teaching what is now Ninja Selling. And along the way, I met a guy named Howard Brinton, who had a company called Star Power. Howard would go around and identify top producers and interview them. And I actually taught in Star Power University for 3 years with Howard. I had a chance to meet a lot of very, very high producing realtors. But what I noticed was there was a difference between those that had high production and those that had high production in a life. And what I noticed was some of them that had the really high production, they were working 24/7. And the wheels were starting to come off in their relation, in their marriage, for example, or their health. And what I was curious about was, what about the ones that are sustainable? Like you mentioned, can build a 10, 20, 30, 40-year career and sustain that level and have a life and so on. And what I noticed was all of them really were focused on relationships. And Michael, you mentioned the Infinite Game. I love that book. And I think that the Infinite Game ties so beautifully with Ninja that transactions are a part of the Infinite Game. A real estate transaction is a finite game. There's a start to the transaction, usually at a time of going under contract. There's a finish at the closing. But the infinite game that's going on at the same time is the relationship with that client. And that endures. And, that is not the end of the relationship at the closing table. It's the continuation. And I think that's the philosophy. I was fortunate. Somebody gave me the book, Finite and Infinite Game by James Carsey back in 1986. That was the original book that inspired Simon Sinek's book. And when I read that, it was like, wow, that's the philosophy that we're going to use in our company and also in Ninja.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many circumstances, and we see it with agents on the other side of transactions sometimes, where you look at something and realize they're looking at things through a whole different lens, even if we're both looking at the same transaction.
If I could share a story, one more thought on this question, Michael, about the difference between chasing transactions and building relationships. I was teaching a Ninja installation, and one of the questions I like to ask is, by show of hands, how many of you have closed an internet lead in the last year? And typically we'll get about 20-25% of the hands will go up. And then I'll say, how many of you have closed more than one? And some of the hands will start to drop, and usually about half the hands drop. We end up with 10 or 15% of the room still has their hands up. And I keep asking, and there was these two young guys sitting together, and they kept their hands up. And I finally just said, they were ones with their hands up. I said, how many transactions did you close last year? And they said, we each closed 30 transactions. And I went, wow, that is incredible. That's really good. Tell me more about that. How did you do that? And they said, well, we're fairly new in the business. We've been in the business about 2 years. We came out of the technology industry, so we understand the technology. We're buying leads, and we're using lead generation model, buying leads, and that's what we're doing. And I said, what are you paying for your leads? And they said, we're paying $15,000 a month. So $180,000 a year. And those leads aren't exclusive, so you have to really, when that lead comes in, you've got to jump on it. So they work shifts. They work 24-hour shifts. One's 24 hours on, 24 hours off. They trade back and forth. And I said, well, obviously this is working for you. You've been in the business 2 years now, and you're doing 30 transactions each. Why are you in this ninja class? And they said, because other people in our company are doing 30 transactions a year, and they're not working 24/7, and they're not spending $180,000 a year buying leads. And we're exhausted. This was a way for us to get started, but it's not sustainable. We're burned out already. We've only been in the business 2 years. There is no way that we can stay in the business. We want what the other people in our office have. And we want to build a ninja-based business, a relationship-based business. And so I think that was very interesting that they didn't see that business model that they had adopted as being sustainable.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. If people ask me what is the biggest challenge or issue the real estate industry has, to me, it's those stats, and I don't have them in front of me, that, at the end of a transaction, 90% of people say they would use their realtor again and 20% do. And yes. The difficult part about that is, if you imagine any other industry, 90% of the people that ate at your restaurant said they'd come back and only 20% did, you'd say, well, that's horrible. You guys are doing a horrible job. And I think the reason because of that is because too many realtors are stuck in that transactional world. And when the transaction's over, this person's not going to buy or sell a house for the stats show us every 7 years. So I guess they'll just call me 7 years from now. And given the length of our relationship and the importance of it, if you don't have that relationship and you don't have that long term, besides it just being more fun to deal with people who know, like, and trust you already, we're not the store. We can't just hope when they decide to go out to dinner next week or the week after, they're going to walk in our restaurant or walk in our store to buy something. If we don't have that relationship 5 or 7 years from now, we're not going to get that business back. And until we change that as an industry, I don't think the consumer is really going to see the value that a realtor really brings to them.
Yeah, and most people, most realtors, they think in terms of, I don't want to wait another 7 years for a transaction with this person, so I'll go chase a transaction somewhere else, not realizing that person knows 4 people that will move this year, and that if you nurture that relationship, there are a lot of referrals going to be coming your way. And that's the one thing that I notice about ninjas is they're really good at building the relationships and receiving the referrals.
So the last 10 or 12 weeks have literally physically separated us. And your whole philosophy is based on a relationship. We've always talked about, connecting with your people and asking your forward questions at the cocktail party and the birthday party or the side of the soccer game or other things. So, does this challenge or question or reinforce a lot of the philosophy you've had over the last 35 years when we're physically separated from one another?
Yeah, you bet. Michael, I appreciate the fact that you used the word physical separation or physical distancing versus social distancing. I don't know who came up with that term, social distancing. It's not accurate. It's physical distancing, at least 6 feet, that type of thing. Socially, I think that we can still connect, and we're connecting like right now on this town hall Zoom call. And it's interesting, the Ninja 9 that we teach, all of that can be done remotely, and you can still stay connected. I think the connection is the key. One of the things I've noticed in this market is the people in our company that had the strongest relationships have done the best. In fact, some of them didn't see any slowdown at all. Our market is down year to date about 7% in transactions, but our company is up 11% in transactions. And I think that's because we built our company around relationships. And I think there's also, in a disrupted market like this, there's a flight to quality. People realize, buyers and sellers realize, I need somebody that really knows what they're doing. And I noticed that top agents, top companies do the best to actually build their business in difficult markets. And I think that top agents realize they need to be with the right company, that, company that's got technology, that has marketing, that has leadership, that has relocation. All of those things are really important in a more difficult market. And historically, I've been through a number of these cycles, and we always build market share in a tough market, and that's what we're doing right now. And I think it's because, again, the enduring competitive advantage, if you will, that we have is our relationships. I think our relationships are our most valuable asset.
And not a knock on anyone else, because you did talk about this a little bit in the beginning, but just so everybody understands, Larry's not out there with a book, although he's written one, or a system, although it's one we follow. This started with a real estate company called The Group in Fort Collins, which still exists today. So sometimes we talk to people, or in all different aspects of life, who may preach but not do. You guys started this by actually, and still continue actually, operating this way in your own company. And so you guys are not out there talking these principles, you're living them every day.
Yeah, we call The Group our sales laboratory. So every day we got to show up and make it happen in the marketplace, and we try things, and if they work, then we teach them in the Ninja selling system.
And I think that, along with your humility, is always giving you great credit in the industry, because again, you're out there doing it. I had a comment in the chat box that somebody said, is there a way that I can use e-leads or those other things we talked about, whether it be cold calling or other things, to build my relationship selling basis? And Larry, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. I don't think you were saying that what those two gentlemen was doing in order to build their business was bad or wrong. I think it's more, how do they take that at that stage of their career and find some balance and maybe transition it to a sustainable career?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was very complimentary of them. I was impressed that they could airdrop into our industry, not know anybody, and within 2 years be doing 30 transactions each. I mean, that's remarkable. That there's a story there, and as to how they did that. And if you are starting out brand new, you're new in real estate, you're new in a market, you're going to need to do everything. You're going to have to hold open houses, call on for sale by owners, maybe even door knock, do some things to build your business. But I think the story there from the two young guys was that isn't, in their mind, a sustainable or smart business long term. And, there was that study that came out a couple of years ago from Fusion Growth Partners. They studied, I forget how many thousands of realtors, top producers. Their definition of a top producer was somebody who was doing at least $250,000 in gross commission income or more. And what they discovered after 10 years is 75% of them were either out of the business totally, or they were making less. They had basically burned out. And so building a smart business, a business that's sustainable, long-term, and that's really the key, is what we're talking about. So I think that's, the leads and so on, that's a great way to start. But, and it's a great way to meet people. But what you really want to do then is not just love them and leave them, just after the transaction, be one of the 94% of realtors statistically who ride off into the sunset chasing another lead and never ever come back and follow up again with those people. You want to be part of the 6%, which are the ninjas, that transaction is not the end, it's the start of that relationship.
Yeah, and I really think that sums up a lot of our philosophy. Gray Bailey had in the note in the comments that that's how he built his business, and then he met John Brewer. And, you know, it makes me go back and think of some of those people that were in the business in 2006, 2007, 2008. And we still have them as well, where, you know, they could, in theory, walk across the stage in a top category. And then when the market has a downturn, they literally can go from hundreds of thousands of dollars in gross commission income to out of the business. And you look at someone like that, and it really, you're like, wow, how can that happen? And then you think, if you don't have the foundation, I mean, you know, John, we teach the foundation classes. I mean, there's a reason, because if you don't have that foundation, no matter how high you build the tower, it will eventually fall over. So.
Exactly.
So let me ask you this question, because, you know, it's something I was thinking about yesterday. We talk about the importance of handwritten notes, or have for a long time. And I think one of the things that made a handwritten note so powerful was the email. The situation that most of us know, we go to the mailbox and get junk mail or bills. And even now bills come a lot of times electronically. So the truth is, there's not a lot in the mailbox. And that handwritten note is so unique and so special, because it is different, because it's not what we're seeing every day. Do you think that gives us an additional opportunity if we're focused on the people and the relationships, given the current environment?
Absolutely. I see a lot of ninjas are doubling down on their notes. You know, the Ninja 9 says we should write 2 notes a day, part of our Ninja 5 daily habits. And I see writing, you know, not 2 a day, but 4 or 10, doubling down on that. I think also on our phone calls, it's amazing. People actually answer their phones in this environment. They're sheltered in place. They love to hear from us. I don't know anybody that isn't having a tremendous response from the phone calls and the personal notes.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were interviewing a woman who was on a help desk call, a help desk job, and she talked about one of her challenges was, even after she'd fixed someone's problem, people want to talk.
Yeah.
And you know, I didn't know how you felt that, you know, a lot of those, you know, are we limited in a relationship selling business when there are no cocktail parties and you're not going to necessarily run into people at the store because people are getting in and out and people have masks on? I mean, how do we adapt a relationship business when a lot of those relational activities aren't taking place right now?
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking about a person in our company named Andrea Toole. And during the 6 weeks from March the 15th to April 30th, that was the 6-week period we were not allowed to show properties. Andrea put 10 transactions together in that 6-week period. She had 6 of her listings sell. She sold 4 buyers. We'll talk later about how you can't show property. But more, what I was interested in, I called Andrea to, number 1, congratulate her, but number 2, to find out, how did you do that? And she made a comment, it's just what you said, Michael, is that she said, well, I was just calling my people to check them and see how they're doing, and as she calls it, loving on them. And it was amazing how many of them would bring up real estate. And they say, you know, we're sitting at home here, can we ask you some real estate questions? And they would bring it up. And they were restless. They wanted to do things. And, you know, one of the jokes in our industry right now, when you're showing a house and you see the buyer shows interest in the house, you can ask that soft closing question. Can you see yourself living in this home? Now the question is, can you see yourself being quarantined in this home? And so some people can't see themselves being quarantined in the home they're in. They realize they want to do something different. So one of the things Andrea did as well was she did very short text videos. she would send a 30-second video via text. And it's interesting, she did a combination of text videos and phone calls. And she said virtually 100% of the people she called on the phone answered the phone, and virtually 100% of the people who she sent text videos to responded back to her. And I think that that is an example in the environment that we're in right now. Yes, we're physically distanced, but we're not socially distanced. And this is not a time to be a hermit and go home and hibernate. It's a time to reach out. And we can't reach out in the traditional face-to-face, but we can reach out with the phone and with the text video and with the Zoom calls and so on.
Yeah, it's unique because even something like this meeting with the company, it's connected us in a social way with you more than we ever would have been able to do. And even in prior years when we've had a speaker come in, the speaker's on the stage and there's 400 people in the audience, and we've heard people from the Zoom calls feel, in a call or in a setting like this, I feel like Larry's talking to me. And so there are opportunities, if we use it correctly, actually socially to become closer together, even as we're physically distanced.
Yep, excellent. Totally.
Larry, you talked about share some of the things that people are doing in Colorado as to some of the adaptations that you guys have made. Like I like the text video that you were talking about. The agent had the connection. And maybe share some of those things. And then the last question I'm going to ask you after that, because we always talk, and this was one that I didn't have on some of the things I told you I might ask you about. We always talk about people following the system, and also the importance of routine, and so not to infringe on any personal space, but I'd love to know, what does your day look like when you kind of get up, and what's your routine, having been someone that we're following kind of your lead?
Well, thank you. You bet. I'll cover those too, starting with what are some things we've had to do differently. One is a mindset. There's that old saying, life isn't about waiting for the storm to end. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And so how do you learn to dance in the rain when the state, the governor of Colorado says you're not allowed to hold open houses, you're not allowed to show houses? What do you do? Now, what's interesting in that is that we're allowed to buy a house if it's under contract. So in other words, the appraiser can go in, the inspectors, the buyer, can go in, very strict rules on that with masks, gloves, booties, all that stuff. But so if you can put a house under contract subject to a personal inspection, then that's what we can do. What we discovered was this, the importance of bringing what I call your A game as a listing realtor. So the houses that are selling right now in a market like that are houses that are beautifully staged, professional photography. Video has become very important, and not just video, but the science behind how to do the right video so that people can relate to it. You want to have the video go through the rooms in the order that somebody would normally walk through a house. And then a huge one that we've been doing for about 15 years that we found in this market is critical is a floor plan. Now we, on most all of our listings, we provide those things: staging, professional photography, video, and a floor plan. We started doing floor plans back in the Great Recession when the appraisers came to us and said, we're basically out of work. Can we go out and measure your houses and do a floor plan? And we thought, well, hey, that'd be great. And so we've been doing that. But what we found was this: when people can't, and we don't call it buying them sight unseen, we call it a virtual viewing or virtual showing. We're going to do a virtual viewing, not sight unseen. We're going to do a virtual viewing, and you have all those components together. They can get a really good feel for the house to the point that they're comfortable writing a contract subject to a physical inspection. So What was interesting, I looked at Andrea's 10 transactions, her 6 listings that sold and her 4 buyers. Her 6 listings that sold had all of those components. They were staged, they had professional photography, they had the floor plan, they had the video, such that people could really get a pretty good feel for it. The 4 houses that she sold had those. But what's interesting is most of the listings in our market don't have those, and they're sitting dead in the water, a lot of them. And the reason they don't have those is because we have had a shortage of inventory for a number of years, and as a result, realtors have cheaped out on their marketing. They say, I'm not going to do staging, I'm not going to do photography, I'm not going to do video, you got to be crazy. Why would I spend the money for that? I could put this house on the market today and I'll have multiple offers within 72 hours. And then I can brag on Facebook about how I sold this house in 3 days or 2 hours or whatever. I don't need to spend the money. Well, the professionals do, and those are the listings that are really selling right now, and they're selling with multiple offers. It was interesting, on her 6 listings that sold, 3 of those sold with multiple offers. And I think what the change that's going to happen in real estate, one of the changes is this. Last year, according to the National Association of Realtors, the average buyer looked at 10 houses before they wrote a contract. For years, 12 houses. And last year it dropped to 10. I think that's because, again, of a shortage of inventory. I'm going to forecast going forward, at least in our market, I think it would not be unusual for that to drop to 5 or 6. I think buyers are much more comfortable now looking at houses online, especially if the listing realtor has brought their A game and is providing the kind of information. I think we're going to see that happen. One other thing about the importance of those, you may have seen the Zillow study. They studied contract cancellations and buyer's remorse, because buyer's remorse and cancellations have risen quite a bit. And some of the speculation is because people get caught up in the frenzy of a multiple offer market, and then later they have second thoughts. If the buyer has the floor plan and the photography and a nice brochure, they're more likely to be able to remember that house and hang in there in the transaction. So that's one thing that we learned. The agents in our company that for whatever reason didn't get on board with how to properly market the listings, their listings are sitting dead in the water. They're realizing that they need to bring their A game. So that would be one thing that I would recommend that you look at, and I think is going to be a change going forward.
I think one other comment on that, because I think those are great points. I also think, that on those listings that she did go under contract, each one of those is an advertisement for her.
Absolutely.
We used before as kind of the store example. Could you imagine a store saying, well, this item's a hot seller, so I'm just going to throw it in the lobby in the box because they're all going to sell really fast anyway? Of course not. You still want to present it because each person coming in there is looking for the advertising and view. And we always talk about that with advertising and agents' listings, whether it's C180 or professional photography or other things and some internal things that we have, that not only are you marketing that house, you're marketing for your next listing and you're marketing yourself. And so each one of those is a reflection of her that, again, is part of the foundation of building a long-term sustainable business.
Absolutely. The referrals that come out of that and how you present yourself. If you're holding an open house, how often do you have neighbors come through? The neighbors come through because they're curious, and what they see is how you market. And if they're thinking about selling, which they might be because that's why they're coming over to check out, quote, the competition or check out the house, and they see how this beautifully staged home with the professional brochure, the counter display, everything done first class, who are they going to want to list their house with? And so it gets back to that old ninja saying, Your next transaction is embedded in this transaction. Your next listing is embedded in this listing. How you show, and that's again the infinite game. You're playing a bigger game. It isn't just about this particular transaction or this particular listing.
So Larry, I would love to, because this is probably one of the, and I assume I know some of the answers, but one I've probably always wanted to ask you. So what is your routine?
Sure, you bet. Well, we're big believers in the Ninja 5 daily habits, that routine. So my routine is a derivation on that. So I'm an early riser. I have an alarm clock, but I usually wake up right before the alarm goes off, and I get up at 5 a.m. I'm part of the 5 a.m. club, and so given my age, which I'm 73 years old, and I'll be 74 here next month. And what I notice is a lot of people my age, gravity starts to take its toll on them, and they kind of walk with this forward lean. And I don't want to be like that. I want to be erect and I want to be active. So the first thing I do is I do a series of calisthenics. And so I do 100 push-ups, I do 100 back exercises, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats. I do a series and I log them in. I have an exercise log. Part of my goal setting is I don't want to miss a day. If I do, I don't want to miss 2 in a row. Year to date, here through, here we are in mid-May, I've missed 2 days so far this year. So I'm pretty consistent in that, and it only takes about 15 minutes. The first thing I do is I start a pot of coffee, and I can usually get my exercise done by the time the coffee is done. And so then I get a cup of coffee, and I will then go into my affirmations, my notes. I'll take that takes about 15 minutes. I have a little desk that's set right beside the kitchen. The notes are there. It's very easy to do. The coffee's ready. I'll have a cup of coffee. I'll write my notes. I'll write my affirmations. Do that part of it. And then I learned something. I believe that the most important thing for me to make an impact in the world and to move forward with Ninja and to influence others is my my creative writing, what it is that I create. So I then take at least an hour in the morning to write, and whether it's originally it's writing the Ninja book or the Ninja manuals, or right now I'm creating an online program. Working on that. We just ended up 2 weeks ago, the audio book, the Ninja audio book was released, that came out. So working on creating projects like that, creating products, creating workshops, writing the script for a video, for example. I do that in the first hour. Then I take a look at my calendar for the day. I'm a big believer in time blocking. So you time block your day, time block your week. I think time blocking is critical when you are sheltered at home. It's easy for the day to get away from you, and you need to time block that day to do your Ninja 9, for example. I think that's very, very important. My calls that I make, and my hot list, my warm list. If it's Monday, my call list that day is to call the owners of Ninja companies that had an installation the previous week. And just to check in, see how it went, do they need anything, thank them for that business, etc. So my morning routine, other than the exercise component, which is a little unique, and the creativity, the creative projects, which is a little bit unique. The rest of it basically is the Ninja 5.
Which is going to get a lot more done than wake up, check email, put out fires all day, and then turn around, all of a sudden the day's over.
Yeah, you'll notice I haven't opened my email until I get through quite a bit of the higher priority, because once you open your email or open your phone, really, you're now on everybody else's agenda. And you've lost control of your day. And, you know, Michael, I was moderating a panel last year of 4 top producers. There was a national brand. They were having a national conference. They had 4 top producers from 4 different markets. They were all ninjas. And I asked one of the questions I asked was, what was it that you learned in the ninja installation that has helped you the most? Now, to put it in perspective, the lowest producer in that group had done 27 million in volume the previous year. The top producer had done over 80 million from Scottsdale, high-end realtor. None of these were teams. They were just out there doing it themselves. But what was interesting, all 4 of them said the same thing. They said the most important thing we took away from the ninja installation was the 5 daily habits. And the lady from Scottsdale made a comment. She says, you know, what I found was when I start my day with the Ninja 5, and I don't open my phone first, I don't get on everybody else's agenda, I stick to my agenda. I do my gratitudes and affirmations. I write my personal notes. I time block my day. I focus on my hot list. I focus on my warm list. When I do that, I have a great day. And when I do that consistently, my great days turn into great weeks. And my great weeks turn into great months. And my great months turn into my best year so far. And so it's so simple. And it's easy to do. It's easy not to do it. It's easy to, you know, have that, you're using your phone as an alarm clock, and the phone goes off and you grab the phone to turn off the alarm, and now that phone's in your hand, and what do? Start checking all your platforms. Well, I'll just check email, or I'll just check my text, or and now whose agenda are you on? You've been drawn into that distraction.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think it's important, and I wanted to end with that, so that, you know, everybody can understand not only, like you said, are you teaching these, but you're living them, and that it really does start with the basics of a foundation. I mean, none of this is crazy math that you have to figure out. It's really just a commitment to a system and a program that works over time. So Larry, I appreciate you giving us so much of your time and for joining us. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be with you. And I just want to say to all of your ninjas, you're in the right place at the right time with the right group of people. In this kind of a market, you want to be in a great tribe. You have a great tribe there at Carolina One. You're with the right tribe. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of your meeting today.
Well, that means a lot. I appreciate it. I'm going to finish up today real quick with the story of Lasse Viren. He's really not somebody that I knew that much about. Lasse Viren was a 23-year-old Finnish policeman who was also a distance runner. And he competed in his first Olympics in Munich in 1972. His first Olympic race was the 10,000 meters. And halfway through, so the 10,000 meters is basically a 10K. So it's 6.2 miles. Halfway through the race, he got tangled up with another runner and fell. And if you've seen how fast those guys go, so it's basically the bridge run. You've seen those guys going down. So A, they're moving at a pretty good clip. And B, this is a 23-minute race. So there's certainly not any time for falling down in the middle of it. And he got back up calmly, which I think was one of the first lessons, because obviously when that happens, the first thing you're really inclined, especially for distance running, it's all about keeping your breathing right and keeping in a rhythm and keeping in a pattern and doing these things. But he got up calmly and he continued the race. And obviously, you know, you may know where this is headed, but he ended up winning the race. And not only did he win the race, but he set a new world record. And there's a couple of lessons there. Like I said, he got up calmly. He was certainly prepared. So I use Lasse Viren as my example for the year 2020. Going into the Munich 1972 Olympics, he was certainly prepared. He was ready. He was on the top of his game. And my guess is things were going pretty well, like we kind of had for a couple of months there in 2020. Halfway through the race, he falls down, but he doesn't give up. He doesn't say, I'm done. He doesn't say, what I'd planned on in my race strategy is over. He gets back up. He continues his race. He gets back on his plan and his course. And he ends up setting a new world record. Now, I'm not saying 2020 is going to be the best year in Charleston real estate ever, which is what I said at the end of 2019. But at the same point, the other question, and John Brewer and I were talking about this yesterday, and no one will ever know. If he hadn't fallen, would he have still set a new world record? Was it the adversity and the challenge that allowed him to push himself even a little further than he ordinarily would have? And I don't know the answer to that, but it really would have been interesting to say if he'd never fallen, would he have gone on to win the gold medal in the 10,000 meters? A few days later, he won the 5,000 meters. He also set Olympic record. And then 4 years later, he defended both titles in 1976. And so I think those are a couple of lessons. The last kind of point that I really took from doing him, and I like to run, certainly not that fast, is one of the things he was really, really known for, not only before he fell, was how he navigated the turns. You know, he was really good about his track positioning and how he navigated those turns. He would pick up distance on the other runners in the track in those curves. In fact, when he won his first gold in the 10,000 meters after falling, he beat the number 2 guy by 7 meters. And in a 10,000 meter race, that's not very far. But he picked up most of that in the curves. And if you remember back in 2009 and 2010, and Steve Harney came and spoke to us, he also used that example in a NASCAR race of, you know, of course, everybody's going to drive faster in the straightaway. But it's when we see these challenges and the curves where, you know, you're inclined certainly to take your foot off the gas. You're certainly can't necessarily hold it against you if you tap the brakes. But if we do during those periods, the impacts are really great. And what Steve Harney talked about in 2010 and 2011 is accelerating into those curves. So when you do hit those straightaways, you're really, you know, at top speed. And so I think those are a few lessons that we can take both from Lasse Viren and remembering back to the last downturn. Now, it doesn't mean we do things recklessly. It doesn't mean, as we've always talked about, this is based on a long-term relationship. So it doesn't mean that if now is not the time for someone to list their house, that we become the pushy salesman to make them list their house. It's simply that we accelerate into the curve by connecting even closer in these periods where people are longing for social contact with our people and serving their needs in real estate and helping them achieve their goals through real estate, whether it's a personal move or an investment property. You know, we need to know what's going on in the rental world and why are single family rentals going to be strong, and how can somebody make a decision now that might educate their grandchildren 15 or 18 years from now. So those are lots of little lessons that we can learn from an unknown, for me, Finnish policeman who certainly overcame a lot of adversity. I apologize, we're a little over time. It's 11:07. We've been ending with a quote from the one that Patty sent me on the first week, so we'll end with that as well. One by Thomas Edison, that our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time. So thank you again, Larry. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Great way to start and end your week with Java with Johns at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and Friday morning. And throughout the week, be on the lookout for IT marketing and other skills and development training. John's got his skills training class, John Brewer, tomorrow morning. Be a great opportunity there. And then I will see everybody at Java with Johns Friday morning at 9. Thanks, Larry. Everybody have a great week.
Thanks, Larry. Great to see you. Have a good week.